Yeah, really like my team. I like the progress they're making. I like their effort, their preparation, their resiliency, their mindset, and just their progress. So I'm encouraged. I think we played a pretty complete game, especially all things considered with injuries and where we are in the season. I thought our offense was more diverse than we had been in terms of touches and different players being able to contribute. It was really good to see Joe Reed be able to not only score special teams wise, but offensively. That added element is something we've been hopeful for and looking forward to for a long time. And so I'd love to see Joe complement Alameda and Hassis and Bryce and Jordan Ellis, Evan Butts. That becomes more powerful and more dynamic of an offense to stop. The point production certainly was effective. Defensively, the turnovers on the 1 4th down stop, which I always count as a turnover, I thought those were critical. Devontae Cross in kind of his debut, I thought did a really nice job. Tommy Christ in his debut battled hard as well. So the players that were filling in, I thought it was a nice starting point for them. I also thought both Juan and Brenton Nelson, while not being 100%, they tried really hard and helped our team. Our punting game was effective. I think field position, especially in us pinning Liberty the number of times we did, creating long fields for them, in addition to our kick returns. Certainly the field position was won through special teams. So collectively, a lot to take from that game. Still things to work on in terms of consistency. Defensively, the first half especially, with adjusting and fitting some of the runs that Liberty was using. So that took us a little bit of time to get to the second half to correct. But overall, a really good game and a nice launch point for the final 2 ACC games going into Georgia Tech on the road this week.
Is it especially important this week that the scout team offense gives the defense a good look, because this offense is so unusual in the ACC, and also you have some more options, I think, now to run that quarterback role that Hayden Mitchell did last year? Have you decided who's going to get the call with that?
So the first part of the question, yeah, it's critical, and I'm not sure there's any offense of preparation or scout team that is capable of doing that in the country. If you remember a year ago, I think Scott Frost was playing quarterback for Central Florida to try to prepare them. I'm not sure it's possible to ever replicate it or simulate it. But some years it's better than others, and sometimes late in the year especially the challenge is greater as you start running out of linemen and just simply football players for the preparation that it takes to be ready for an opponent. So we're still considering who might be in that role this year. But again, this is, I think, however many years I've been a head coach, I think we've played the option every year over that entire span and have had pretty good success. So we'll do the best we can to simulate that look through kind of the tried and proven methods over time with the existing resources we have.
Coach, you've mentioned that you faced the option since back in New Mexico State against the Air Force. Would you say it's the most difficult offensive scheme for you to prepare for?
I'm not sure I can say it's the most difficult. I would say maybe it's the most difficult within the time frame you normally have and with the resources you normally have to prepare for it. I heard a statistic the other day. I think Georgia Tech has played in 20 of 22 bowl games, or bowl games 20 of the last 22 years. So that would lend credibility to your question, that most teams aren't quite able to prepare well enough within the time frame given to be able to have consistent success. And the option teams, over time, the preparation model usually tilts in their favor enough to allow them to play postseason consistently.
And obviously, we don't see Georgia Tech employ the forward pass very often, but Marshall threw a long touchdown pass last week. How do you make sure your defense doesn't kind of get lulled to sleep defending the run and give up that long pass?
Yeah, it's always a challenge for any pass team primarily that then chooses to run. Sometimes those work well, and for teams that run almost exclusively, when they throw it, it's a surprise. And you do the best you can to take away what a team does primarily, and then you do your next best to address their complements, and that's what we'll do with this one.
Obviously, you've had success against Georgia Tech's option. Did you learn anything from the Navy game?
Yeah.
Why was there such a difference?
There was really, a valuable takeaway, and again, I love playing option football just because, again, the way that I frame it to my team, it's an occasion to rise to. It's a challenge. It stresses you in about every way, and that's where growth happens, not only for individuals but teams. And so, yeah, the Navy game helped us in so many ways. Their version, even though Kenny Niumatalolo is a Paul Johnson protege and understudy, it doesn't mean the schemes were identical or were they identical in that game. And then unique set of circumstances with our team having the first chance to play postseason, and just kind of where the mindset was as I was working to help us prepare and develop. So I would say not only were there some subtle scheme changes, but there was certainly some mindset and cultural things we were working through as we build the program. And I think the combination of both those really was about equal in terms of the outcome. The last point I think I'll make is when you play an option team, you certainly have to score, and it's better if you're able to maintain possession of the ball and score. And so one of the biggest contributing factors for that game, if we're talking about the postseason a year ago, was our inability to hold on to the ball, to move it with any effectiveness, time of possession, and points. And so when and if you're going to beat an option football team, the complementary nature of how you play the game, it has to be in place. It can't just be one side or the other. And in that game, we didn't really have a strong showing from any of our sides. But when you consider if you are going to have a model to beat an option football team, it has to be offense, defense, and special teams. It cannot be one-sided, in my opinion.
Jeff was asking about the scout team, and I'm curious, because of your numbers on the defensive line in particular, how do you balance the working on cut blocks versus you can't afford to lose anybody?
Yeah, it's really challenging because if you lose players in practice, practice is not as important as the game. But if they're not prepared for the game, that's usually 1, 2, 3, or 4 series before you figured it out, and sometimes that's too late in terms of points. So, yeah, over the years we've developed a lot of unique ways to practice that we think helps us prepare. It's not perfect, but to address just what you're talking about. And it takes a lot of innovation and a lot of simulation without injury. But we can't afford one more player to go down at defensive line. And certainly they have to be ready to play for this game. So, we've looked at methods in the past for how to do it, and we're through the policy manual and all the records we've kept, there's some answers in there, and hopefully that they'll be effective.
And in terms of the way some of those young defensive linemen have come along, kind of bad timing to suddenly throw triple option at them, but what have you seen from the development of some of the younger guys, Tommy, et cetera?
They're developing. So basically Tommy Christ and Jordan Redmond and Aaron Famui, and I'll put Dylan Thompson in that mix, even though he's a grad transfer. He hadn't played much. He's still learning and adjusting to our culture and the expectation and the effort. And so really you have Eli and the other 4 who are at similar places, and that is, I would say, close to where Richard Burney was a year ago as he moved from tight end. And so it'll be a trial by fire for all of them in terms of their first look at option football, and that's a lot to be learned.
Bronco, you mentioned scheming defensively to stop primarily a team's strength and then kind of secondarily paying attention to what else they could do. Have you guys been slow to adapt to that sometimes in games this year? Like Liberty ran a lot when that wasn't obviously what you guys were anticipating.
So I think we were effective in identifying exactly what was happening each play and what needed to be corrected. Sometimes then it takes players' experience level and concentration to then take the feedback and apply it the very next play. And so there was very little adjustment schematically that happened at halftime that didn't happen after the first series. But it did take time for the players that were corrected to then adjust and apply. And it took about a half before they did.
And you mentioned the time of possession thing. When Georgia Tech played at Virginia Tech scored in 3 plays on one drive, 5 plays on their second drive, and at the end of Georgia Tech's second drive, they'd run like 27 plays to Tech's 8. The defense was already kind of gassed. And with your numbers, how important will like third down be in this game?
Yeah, it's not only third down, but it's fourth down. You really have to consider when you play option football that every drive is 4 down and every field position is 4 down territory. If you don't frame it that way, then the mindset of your team can be affected when they think they've made a stop on third and they go for it and get it. And so the wear and tear of the ups and downs of a normal third down stop against option football, you have to consider fourth down, third down. And when you make that transition and just take that matter of fact, it gives you a better point of reference. If your offense scores quickly, great that you get points, and especially if you get points early, it doesn't mean option teams can't come back from deficits. I think that's a myth. It makes it harder, but they certainly can. However, points and time of possession is the ideal when you're playing option football, and then your special teams and where the opponent starts with the ball. All of that's a collective, and so in my experience, the best way to have success against option football isn't just, and usually the focus is on just the defense. That's one of the 2/3. The other 2/3, I think, are rarely talked about enough, and the defense is given disproportionate value, and the other 2/3 actually controls more of outcome than what we, I think, consider in those games.
Brenton Nelson went from walk-on to ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. He had the big fourth down breakup the other night. Has his role changed this season in the secondary with Quinn gone, and has he elevated his game this year?
Yeah, Brenton has elevated his game. I would say what was remarkable or what was impressive about his performance on Saturday was just simply that he practiced a little on Thursday, was in a walking boot the entire week, and basically performed well with very little practice, which based on a year ago, it took every bit of practice for every play all week long to then get some level of consistency in the game. And so the maturity is certainly helping, his production is helping, and we had to have a strong performance from him as well as Juan, and I wasn't sure Brenton would play at all, and that helped Devontae to be surrounded by those two, knowing that Joey was out.
Coach, along those same lines, you lost Dylan Rankensmeyer as well as Garrick Vollmer in that game. What are their status, and also can we get an update on Joey Blunt as well?
Joey Blunt, I don't know yet, and I have no report. Dylan Rankensmeyer had a concussion in the game. He's going through protocol. That's varied in protocol. Some players take weeks, others take days, and usually that's tied to the number of concussions they've had, not always, but usually. And so Dylan will wait to see. And then immediately after, Garrick Vollmer goes in and has a knee injury. I don't know yet what his status is as well, so that led us to put Jake Feeler at center and then shuffle the offensive line. So the offensive line is not yet to the point of our defensive line, but when you lose 2 players at the same position in the same game, unique challenges. And again, it's not just Virginia football. There's other programs that are, again, it's week number 11, and that's kind of part of what happens. One more reason, while the redshirt rule is a fantastic rule and still might not be enough to address roster size and student-athlete well-being in terms of when you consider now 12 games and then possible conference championship game and then possible bowl game, So it was a step in the right direction, but I'm not sure it might have moved the needle as far as we all would have hoped. It just reinforces the idea roster size matters.
Bronco back here. Rob Snyder's a guy who you would talk about a lot, coaches, but we wouldn't get to see it prior to this year. How has he kind of developed now that he's getting this experience?
Yeah, Rob is currently performing and moving and grading at a level that exceeds that of his peers. And so he has a really natural feel at the inside linebacker position. He's where he's supposed to be, when he's supposed to be there, with the capability of finishing plays a lot. And so that's been one of the real bright spots down the stretch, is having a player play well at inside linebacker and consistently, who wasn't really on the radar and has become and now emerged as someone it'd be hard to imagine playing without him now. So really a bright spot.
How much did you miss him against Pitt?
A lot. He's a really effective tackler with very good instincts developed over time. Really nice focus on where his keys are, and against non-traditional run teams, Pitt, Georgia Tech, where you put your eyes is really important, and he just happens to have developed over years of practice and to where it's become instinctual, and he's very consistent. So certainly we missed him, and we're certainly glad he's back for this week.
Some of your best players are from Georgia. What does this game mean from a recruiting standpoint?
Means a lot. Georgia or Atlanta is in our footprint. Footprint is an area we consider a primary recruiting area. It's not far away in terms of driving. Certainly about an hour flight, an hour and 10 minutes, which we love. And we have a strong following, as well as the coaches in that area, as well as players. They have strong interest in Virginia. There's huge momentum being gained there. We can sense it, we can feel it, and the results are certainly starting to show that. So ACC wins in general, yeah, they certainly are important because of just the conference championship. But when you win, and especially if you win on the road, man, that makes a real difference to recruits and coaches and fans in those areas in terms of expanding your brand and carving niches out in our opponent's territory.
You mentioned the redshirt rule, and I wanted to ask you about your approach to Brennan and how it works. First off, how different is it with a quarterback as opposed to some of those other positions?
I would say the quarterback is a completely different position, requires completely a very distinct and differentiated style of management and usage. And especially in program building, if you don't manage your quarterback right, you can't stay on track timetable-wise, because that one position affects outcome more than any other. We've seen enough from Brennan, not only in games, but especially in practice, where we certainly want his year. We want him here as long as we can. And so at that one position, because Bryce has remained healthy, thank goodness, has allowed that to happen. So it's not only how well Bryce is playing and consistently, but that's allowing now for the transition eventually to Brennan, and our depth to be established there for the program to be healthy at a position that means probably more than any other.
And I hope I word this in a way that it makes sense, but I know you talked about winning a bowl game being really important. Is there more value for Brennan in all those practices and getting ready and going into a bowl game than maybe a spot series in a regular season game from a development standpoint?
That's a really tough question. I don't think anything truly simulates the game as much as we try. So I would love to have a series or two or a quarter or two. I would feel better if that could happen. The reality is, with as close of as much parity exists in the ACC, as hard as those games are to win, and the chance, barring injury, that you can just substitute another quarterback in, most likely is not going to happen. And so you do the best you can through practice, and that'll have to be enough, which it's a good trade as long as with Bryce healthy and the way he's playing.
With Bryce Hall leading the country in PBUs and passes defended, what have you seen from other teams in terms of shying away or trying to challenge him, and what in your mind makes him such a really good player?
Interestingly enough, I would say week in and week out, he's not the targeted side, nor is he the targeted player. Liberty took the exact opposite approach. They had a very strong receiving core, and chose, and maybe just simply by concern for pressure or their quarterback getting hit, or the possible turnovers, they wanted to appeared they wanted to run the football and keep the game manageable. And then if they threw, there's more risk and volatility, which is what happened with the 3 interceptions. It turned out to be exactly, I think, maybe what they were trying to prevent. But when they did throw it, surprising probably to Bryce, myself, and everyone else, it went to him at a player that was returning back to their roster. And so he's consistent in terms of what contributes. There is not a player on our team at any position, nor would there be more than probably 4 or 5 that I've ever coached that are more diligent in their preparation than him. I mean, he literally, between classes, and he's there as if it's a job. There's notebooks and preparation and food, and he finds a spot and he sets up camp, and he's there every minute he's not in class. And his preparation is exemplary, and he's demonstrating, number one, what I would love to have our entire team and the culture to be like, of how important the games are and what it takes to be exceptional. He's giving a real story and a real model for what that looks like. And again, in my entire being an assistant coach and a head coach, I can't think of more than 4 that are equal to the investment he's making in his preparation.
Bronco, a little bit of a bigger picture question. How would you describe the evolution of your defenses from the time you first got into this business through your time at BYU and then now here? What principles have stayed the same, and what have you had to modify and adapt for the kind of player you can get here at Virginia?
Yeah, pretty broad question. I prefer aggression. I prefer effort. I prefer pressure. I prefer a dictatorial style, just in general. I love hearing the game as well as seeing just fierce competitive spirit. As I started in the profession, my first job was as a defensive coordinator right out of college at Snow Junior College, and it was pressure oriented. And then Northern Arizona, which was pressure oriented and almost all man coverage from press. And then it was to Oregon State with Rocky Long, which was pressure and innovation, getting the most out of players that were usually overmatched and having success. To Louisiana Tech as a different style, a little bit more matchup zone based, just for a 9-month period. Back with Rocky again for innovation and creativity and effort all mixed together in a unique delivery. To BYU, which was again 3-3-5 and oriented, till I realized we would not be able to have enough defensive backs recruited there that would be sustainable, so it shifted to 3-4 and kind of Dick LeBeau's influence under pressure and an aggressive and unique style with a 3-4 delivery rather than 3-3-5. And then coming to UVA, the adaptation over a 3-year period from base 3-4, which is the install, which was year 1, to then all of the offshoots that have happened off of that by the personnel. So we have up to 3 and sometimes 4 different personnel packages per game versus what personnel the offense puts in the game to try to give our existing roster the best chance versus their identity out of that personnel group. And so, yeah, we've gone to great lengths to play different styles of defense. So there's 3-4, there's 3-3-5, there's 4-2-5, and sometimes others all in the same game. And so the volume, we had a recruit that just visited, and I think his comment was, this is not a dumb guy's defense. And listening to the vernacular and the identity changes and the shifts and trying to keep up with it, and that's true, but it's also UVA. Which fits perfectly. These are bright, talented, smart kids, and we ask a lot of them from a cognitive standpoint, and I like that. That was a long answer, wasn't it?
Bronco, several coaches have said after games this year that kind of how Bryce Perkins goes is how you guys go in many ways. And he's not every week been spectacular, but when he's been good, he's been really good. And he seems to have an incredible amount of confidence to almost be cocky running the ball, like you guys aren't going to catch me when he's scrambling. He seems to have really good ball security and just a remarkable amount of patience when he runs the ball to wait for things to develop. Kind of how would you assess what he's done for you guys this year and where all that comes from?
Yeah, what he's done for us, we ought to just say it like it is. He's helped us win 7 games, and he's the primary catalyst for that. Our culture certainly is improved. Our depth has improved. Our recruiting has improved. Our execution has improved. But without Bryce at that position, I don't think we see the results that we currently have in year 3 without his skill set. And his skill set simply means that plays that have not been executed necessarily very well, his ability to create and make something out of nothing consistently and repeatedly gives us a chance to manage the game. And then when we do block and when we do execute at a high level and he's able to play the position within the system, then that's even better. So he's been able to help us progress within the core of what we want to do, and then his ability to create outside of that helps us win. And as he goes, certainly our team goes. It's easy to see.
When you talk about the culture change, how important has it been that he's elevated himself to kind of a captain status, and he arrived here with no knowledge of what the culture was, kind of what you discovered against Richmond? He had no background in any of that, so he just kind of brought his own expectations. And how important has that been?
One of the things that I've noticed about our grad transfer, like offensive linemen, or in this case a transfer from a junior college, is they come with an urgency and a very different timetable of what they want to do and when they want to do it. And I like that. So some of the players that had been in our program over time as we inherited, their timetable and urgency just wasn't quite the same. And then as players were added, not only as transfers, but as junior college transfers, and then first-year players where we played 17 of them last year and still have a really young roster, we're bringing players into play. And so the urgency of who we bring is really important. When you have your quarterback come as a transfer with the clock ticking, and I remember a comment, I was speaking at Spring Socials, and one of the comments in a negative way was, when are you going to get done playing rent-a quarterbacks? Because we had Kurt Bankert and now we had this one. And really, I would argue that without those two, this program wouldn't have been turning as quickly now in back-to-back bowl years and a winning season and et cetera. And the urgency of them and the preparation and the excellent recruiting of finding the right kids to lead at that position, I think it's been really imperative. And so to answer your question and try to summarize it, the urgency they come with helps them adjust and adapt to the culture, because in a way, if they don't, what are they going to do? This is kind of a last stop after they transfer. So they come wanting to contribute, wanting to learn, wanting to adapt. Bryce's personality has just made all of that with poise and with grace and effortless, because it's who he was anyway. And sometimes we miss in terms of the personality. With Bryce, it was just an absolute perfect fit. Everyone sees the on the field, but his influence, as you mentioned, and I think it's fair, raising himself to captain status, the team knows that, and they would probably acknowledge that same thing.
I was asking about Tim Harris, and he's got the NFL measurables, and,
Yes.
and people might say he hasn't lived up to kind of the hype or the expectations. What have you seen from him in the time you've been with him, and then specifically this season?
Yeah, I would say that that's fair and accurate over his career of not measuring up and having the measurables. What I will say is about the last 5 weeks, he'll receive my strongest endorsement for anyone that wants a really good player at corner, with now a competitive, fierce mindset, a strong work ethic, and the production to go with it. And so it's been really fun. I'm so happy for him. He's really done a nice job of becoming just a diligent and determined and more durable football player.
You mentioned to Hank the urgency for a grad transfer. Is that what flipped for Tim? Was it just, hey, my time's running out?
I'm not sure, and that would be a great question for him. But he does trust us, and he's really good about receiving feedback, and he wants to know what he can do better, and he's taken that to heart. And there's been some really brutal, hard conversations, and if it remains like this, this will not happen. Talking about his goals, dreams, aspirations, or even helping our team, and sometimes that can cause any of us to become discouraged and despondent. He went just the other way, and that has made him a very productive player and essential to what we're doing. And remember, Darius Bratton was ahead and playing really well. So it's to have kind of earned the nod over Darius over this time, and that's been very challenging. And because we really think Darius is a good player, and so I think the story that you're talking about with Tim has been one of the most gratifying to this point of the season, seeing that start to turn and emerge. I'd say about the last 5 weeks is what I'd recall in terms of time frame.
A little frustrating though that it took this long.
Not necessarily. The who and what's happening now, it's like I don't remember the other part, and I don't think it does any good.
Coach, you've talked about it's no problem being transparent about your goals, and there's still some out there.
Totally.
Do you permit conversation amongst the players about winning the Coastal? Obviously, the focus is on Georgia Tech, but do you welcome that? Take us into the culture of what you would permit.
We usually, on Mondays, when I talk to the team, kind of addressing the past game and then framing the next game, there have been weeks where I've shown the standings and then shown our mission, our goals, and that's part of my job, is reframing and acknowledging. And yes, we want to win the Coastal. We're part of the ACC, and we want to win the conference championship. And you don't win that unless you win the Coastal. To be able to talk about that sincerely and honestly in year 3, in week 11, how could I not talk about it? And I believe we can win as many games as we truly want to. That's what I believe. And so, yeah, we have a great chance to play another ACC opponent and battle, and we have a chance to win the game. I won't talk any further than that, but that's what our team knows, and they certainly know that they're going to have to be exceptional and play and prepare really well and win 2 if they want to contend for the conference championship. And they'll need help from other teams as well. So, okay, now after we've said all that, good. Okay, we play Georgia Tech and the option, and any minute now we're not talking about that, it's going to hurt us. So we acknowledge it, address it, get it all out there, and then turn the switch, and it's only now Georgia Tech. But to not acknowledge it, I don't think it's realistic nor fair for anyone. And so better just to say it, frame it, and then, okay, what's it going to take, and then dial back into that.
At the risk of making you bristle, there are people on Twitter, there are people even in this room that say, why would you want to win the Coastal to play that monstrosity that is Clemson? What would you say to that?
Well, for those that have kind of been paying attention along the way, we like hard things as a football team, and I love hard things to the point where I chose to leave home and family and travel across the country, find 14 others maybe crazy enough to come with me and take it on. And that's exactly what we want. And you can't go, you can't get to where you want to go until you go through whatever you choose to call an exceptional football team. And how do you truly know until you play? And I would like nothing more than to truly know, and then learn and apply whatever I need to learn and apply after that.